The air in the private dining room of the West Wing hung thick and heavy, smelling faintly of old linen starch, beeswax, and the metallic tang of unspoken power. Sunlight, filtered through the thick, historic panes, cast long, dusty shadows across the polished mahogany table. Outside, the manicured lawn of the White House offered a deceitful calm. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, almost surgical whir of the HVAC system's circulating air that felt too important to breathe. William "Bill" Thorne, the former manager of the Meridian, once the epicenter of DC's clandestine culinary power plays, sat perfectly still. His composure was an artifact forged in years of high-pressure hospitality, a silent armor that deflected the palpable weight of the room. He wore a charcoal suit that betrayed no wrinkle, a reflection of the man himself, meticulous, understated, and terrifyingly calm. 4 years. 4 years since the incident that had ripped his world apart and ironically built him into something infinitely stronger. The incident that had begun with a misguided, politically charged baseball cap worn by the youngest son of the then-president Barron Trump, and Thorne's quiet, uncompromising decision. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't called security. He had simply walked over, his shadow long over the reserved table, and stated, in a voice barely above a whisper, that the Meridian upheld a strict policy against political signaling within its private dining spaces, maintaining a necessary neutrality for all clientele. The subsequent media detonation had been instant and brutal. Thorne, the quiet, dedicated professional, was branded a radical, a communist, an elitist snob. Threats flooded the restaurant's phone lines. Pundits dissected his moral character on cable news, transforming a simple breach of house policy into a national culture war flashpoint. He lost the Meridian, of course. The owner, fearful of the boycotts engineered by the president's social media machine, had offered Thorne an ultimatum: recant, apologize publicly, and pledge allegiance to the prevailing political wind. Thorne declined. He did not issue a statement. He did not engage in the digital mudslinging. He simply resigned, his dignity intact, walking out into a media hurricane with nothing but his reputation, which, for half the country, was now toxic waste. But Thorne understood the true nature of power better than his accusers. Power, he knew, despised silence and thrived on reaction. His refusal to engage was his first and most potent act of silent resistance. For the first 6 months, the silence was agonizing. He moved into a small rented apartment above an aging bookstore in Georgetown, the perpetual scent of vanilla-heavy old paper his only companion. The world moved at the frenetic pace of a 24-hour news cycle, demanding his rage, his tears, his defense. He gave it none of it. Instead, he channeled the fury into foundation work. He established the Ethical Hospitality Initiative, EHI, a nonprofit dedicated to funding scholarships for marginalized students entering the service industry, and crucially defending professionals unjustly targeted by public figures or media smears. He spent his days writing grants, the thin, dry paper crunching softly under his precise penmanship. He didn't crave the spotlight he had lost. He crafted a new one, focusing the beam not on himself, but on the systems of integrity that the incident revealed were crumbling. The small foundation grew slowly, nourished by independent donors who valued his quiet resilience. Each successful scholarship funded, each threatened worker defended, was a piece of the original structure rebuilt, stronger and more resistant to fire. This silent, dignified construction of legacy was the true vengeance. Now, 4 years later, that legacy had become undeniable. The EHI was cited on major news channels for its impactful work, lauded for its apolitical, measurable success. Bill Thorne's name, once synonymous with elitist cancellation, had morphed into a quiet synonym for integrity. That shifting perception, coupled with a growing legal need for a neutral, unimpeachable figure to mediate a complex labor dispute involving a major White House contractor, was why Thorne was here. The summons had arrived via a heavy, cream-colored envelope, embossed with the presidential seal, a formal invitation disguised as a command. The door to the private dining room opened, a quiet, oiled mechanism, drawing Thorne's attention. A heavy sense of gravity preceded the man who entered. Donald V. Sterling, the President of the United States. Sterling was larger than life, his movements punctuated by the aggressive confidence that had defined his career. He entered the room as if the carpet were a stage built solely for his entrance, pulling focus instantly. Sterling did not extend his hand immediately. He moved to the opposite end of the mahogany table, stopping near the heavy burgundy velvet drapes, and simply looked at Thorne. "Mr. Thorne!" Sterling's voice boomed, too loud for the intimacy of the room, vibrating the thin glass of the water carafe placed between them. "A real pleasure. A genuine pleasure. We have a history, don't we?" Thorne met his gaze directly. His eyes were clear, the color of aged scotch revealing nothing. "Mr. President?" Thorne responded, his voice measured, lower in pitch than Sterling's, forcing the president to lean in slightly to catch the full sentence. "We do. I believe we both remember the circumstances." Sterling chuckled, a short, sharp bark that sounded brittle. He moved to the head of the table, not sitting immediately, preferring to tower over the setting. He picked up a solid silver teaspoon, turning it over and over in his massive hand. "Circumstances, right? A little misunderstanding. People get emotional, especially around my family. High tensions. Look, Bill, let me be frank. That restaurant, the Meridian, it was fine, nice, but too small for you, too provincial. You have a massive talent for organization, for logistics, for control. I saw that. You know how many people I've fired in my life? Thousands. But I always remember the ones who stand their ground, even when they're standing on the wrong side." Thorne did not flinch at the casual rewriting of history. He simply adjusted the cuff of his shirt, a subtle motion. The sound of the crisp cotton moving against the smooth skin of his wrist was the loudest noise he made. "My intention at the Meridian was to maintain neutrality, Mr. President. That was the policy. It was not a political act. It was professional integrity." Sterling waved the teaspoon dismissively, finally taking his seat, settling into the large, high-backed leather chair with a soft thud. "Integrity. Yes, yes. We all love integrity, when it serves us, right? But Bill, you got screwed. Badly. And I respect that you never whined about it. You just vanished. Did your little foundation thing. Very commendable, very quiet." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, the light glinting off the gold signet ring on his finger. "I brought you here because I need that integrity now. We have a problem with the new border wall contracts. Total mess. Fraud. I need someone entirely clean, someone everyone will trust, even the vultures in the press, to come in, clean house, and tell them I fixed it." Sterling paused, letting the offer hang in the air like an expensive cologne. The power implicit in the words was intoxicating. A position of ultimate authority, a chance to be vindicated, to return to the pinnacle. Thorne looked past the president towards the window where the shadow of a passing squirrel flickered briefly. He took a slow, deep breath, tasting the faint, dry dust of the room. "And what position are you offering, Mr. President?" Thorne asked, his voice even devoid of excitement or eagerness. "Administrator of Presidential Oversight, a cabinet-level position. You'd have total access, total control. The press would eat it up. The man they tried to cancel now saves the administration. Think of the headlines, Bill." Sterling smiled, a wide, practiced expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's total vindication for you. Everything back and then some. A chance to show them you were on the team all along." The last phrase was the pivot point. Show them you were on the team all along. Thorne finally allowed a trace of emotion to enter his eyes. Not anger, but profound disappointment. He lifted the pristine white napkin from the table and placed it meticulously in his lap. The fabric was heavy, starched to the texture of thin cardboard. "Mr. President," Thorne began, his tone glacial, "I appreciate the offer and the acknowledgement of my skills. It is true, I built my current organization, the EHI, on precisely the type of operational integrity that you are describing." He paused, letting the silence stretch again, allowing the weight of his refusal to settle before the words were even spoken. Sterling's finger, which had been tapping lightly on the edge of the table, stilled. "However," Thorne continued, "my mission at the EHI is simple: to protect the vulnerable from the systemic abuse of institutional power. My integrity, as you put it, is not a commodity for sale or an asset to be leveraged against my own history. When I enforced policy at the Meridian, I did so because maintaining an apolitical space was critical to the dignity of the service provided. That policy was violated by a member of your family's detail, and I stood by the consequences. That decision cost me my career, but it secured my reputation. He leaned forward now, only slightly, fixing Sterling with a gaze that carried the moral authority of 4 years of silent, difficult rebuilding. To accept a position within your administration now, Thorne articulated each word distinctly, would not be vindication. It would be an admission that my stand 4 years ago was merely an audition for a better job. It would instantly invalidate the EHI's mission, which is based on the idea that genuine integrity must remain independent of political patronage. Sterling's face hardened. The smile vanished. The color seemed to drain slightly from his cheeks, leaving a faint pink hue where the blood pressure had dropped. "You're turning down a cabinet position?" Sterling asked, the disbelief vibrating in his voice. "You're turning down the highest honor your country can give you, after what I put you through. That's foolish, Bill. That's insane pride." "It is not pride, Mr. President," Thorne countered softly. "It is consistency. You put me through a public crucible, yes. You dismantled my life. But in doing so, you provided me with the opportunity to build something lasting, something defined entirely by my own principles, free from your influence. That organization helps people who are struggling daily, people who are overlooked by your government." Thorne paused, letting the full force of his moral high ground land. The only sound was the delicate scraping of the silver spoon as Sterling unconsciously shifted it across the polished wood. "My success is the EHI's success. That is my true vindication," Thorne concluded, "and I cannot risk that for temporary power." The ensuing silence was the most explosive moment of the confrontation. Sterling stared, his lips pressed into a thin line. He had anticipated rage, a negotiation, perhaps even a tearful acceptance. He had not anticipated this serene, unshakable refusal, delivered with the quiet grace of a maître de rejecting a forged reservation. "Get out," Sterling finally said, his voice low, guttural, stripped of its public flourish. Thorne rose smoothly without hurry. He did not say goodbye. He simply pushed his chair back into the precise position it had occupied before he sat down. He met Sterling's furious gaze one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the power dynamic. Sterling held political power, but Thorne held moral power, and in this room, the latter was winning. He turned and walked towards the door, his steps silent on the heavy carpet. The news broke 2 days later, not as a formal statement, but as an anonymous leak from a furious administration official to a major DC political blog. "Thorne rejects presidential appointment. Insane pride or true integrity." The reaction was immediate and seismic. The narrative was perfect. The small man who lost everything to stand on principle, returning years later to refuse the ultimate temptation, thereby doubling down on his original position. The media. Frenzy. Headline. The Washington Post. Thorne's unlikely refusal becomes a quiet act of rebellion. Headline. Breitbart News. Imagined. Anti-MAGA manager proves he hates America. Spurns president's olive branch. The internet erupted. On MSNBC, a political analyst wiping a tear declared, "This is the moment. This is proof that you can lose the battle and win the war." He didn't just survive the cancellation, he weaponized his own integrity. Conversely, on Fox News, a pundit railed, "He spat in the face of the highest office. This man is an operative. He's a Democrat plant who used the president's goodwill to boost his fringe organization. He needs to be investigated." Twitter reaction. Citizen ethics. 34K followers. Bill Thorne is the rarest thing in DC. A man who understood that integrity is a fixed asset, not a negotiable currency. He traded a 6-figure salary for moral authority. That's the real market value. Patriot First 1776, 500K followers. This whole thing proves the deep state never rests. They ruined his restaurant, gave him a grant, and now he works for Soros. End of story. In small towns across America, far from the White House, the story resonated deeply. The local newspaper in Spokane, Washington, ran an editorial titled, "The Dignity of the Waiter." It described Thorne's decision not as a political statement, but as a commitment to the forgotten professionalism of the service industry. The idea that you can fulfill your duty without compromising your soul, even when dealing with the highest echelons of power. The EHI saw an unprecedented surge in donations and volunteer applications. People didn't just want to support Thorne, they wanted to embody his quiet resistance. His refusal became a template for professional ethics worldwide. Bill Thorne, however, returned to his small office in Georgetown. The scent of old paper was reassuring. He ignored the flood of interview requests. He ignored the tweets and the cable news analysis. His focus was already shifting back to the ledger, the grant applications, and the young students depending on the EHI's support. He had won not by shouting, but by living. He had shown the world that true vindication is not achieved by defeating your adversary on their own terms, but by building a life so morally solid, so undeniably beneficial to others, that the aggressor's attempts to destroy you only serve to elevate you higher. He sat at his desk, the sunlight falling across his hands. He picked up a freshly sharpened pencil, the faint woody scent filling the air, and began reviewing the next scholarship application. His hands were steady. They had never been steadier. He was exactly where he needed to be. His revenge was quiet, productive, and permanent. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.